Hello. Decided not to waste any video recording myself drinking coffee.
Uh,
So, Peter, good to see you. Well, hear you. So,
I'll sort of be a fly on the wall today. I'm still recovering from the ordeal.
yeah, how are you doing?
I have to come on with a lot of stuff now.
Of course. How are you doing in general?
I've been playing a lot of what ifs, imagining all the other scenarios where things might have worked out better, but it is what it is.
With all due respect, that is a fool's errand. Having gone through losing my best friend, my father, my mother-in-law, and now another very close friend is suffering from late-stage cancer, I'm telling you it's a fool's errand, not out of disrespect, but out of going through the same myself. As you said, it is what it is.
it's hard. We know too.
I think it's one of the last taboos of our culture. Of course, losing a child is unbearably awful to even think about, but losing parents, which we all should, is so truly awful. And it's not really part of what we're allowed to look at. The only long discussion I've really had on this, on losing my father soon after, was when I was in California at a big whatever conference related to Doug, but it was something else the next few days. And I just had one of those attacks. I don't know if you've had many of them yet, Peter, where you just can hardly breathe. And the only person I could talk to was actually Tim Berners-Lee. Turns out he had lost his mother not long before. So it was very bizarre to be commiserating with someone who even my father knew who was. Wish I could have told him, but anyway. When I lost my father, Peter, one of my friends sent a strange reply to the news. He said, "Now your father will never know what you accomplish," which was odd. That was from Vint Cerf. So I asked him when he lost his father, 14. So his father never knew hardly anything of Vint's life. Anyway, let's hope there's more people in the room so we can get back to politics. And if you don't know that reference, I'm deeply ashamed of you. That's a joke, by the way. Are you getting any opportunity to relax at all, Peter? Are there any walks you can go on and things?
Well, we weren't getting much sleep near the end. Every time he stirred, we had to go and check and make sure that he didn't lose balance whenever he moved anywhere. So I was running on like 3 hours of sleep a night, but now we're sleeping normally again. Well, as normally as you can sleep after something like this, but we're getting a lot more hours. But I feel, really drained, caregiver burnout. They're finally starting to take the mask mandates off so we can actually go out in public without one of those wrapped around blocking our breath. That helps.
You should be careful though, if you're in a crowded space. The Omicron new variant, the B2 or whatever it's called, is pretty nasty. So we don't wear masks all the time, but if we're in somewhere crowded, we still do it. Just don't get COVID on top of this, Peter.
Well, after the hospital told us that he'd passed away and we got home, about an hour or so later, we got a robocall from the hospital. Good news, John Wasoko does not have COVID.
Oh my God. Right.
Yeah, and the only good thing about that is that means that Mom and I have to be free from COVID too, because if we had it, we would have given it to him and he would have tested positive.
You would think that, but I've actually had quite a few friends who only one person in a relationship, even if they sleep in the same bed, got it.
Really?
I don't know how that happens, but yeah, quite a few times. Very, very odd.
Because you'd think mom would have been sure to have given it to him if she had it.
Yeah, I would have thought so, but a few times either it doesn't happen at all, or they get symptoms after the other one has already gone away with symptoms. Like the incubation period can be odd. Next, my trainer, her husband to be, got it last week, and she was fine, no problem at all, and their baby, who was about 1. And then boom, quite a few days later, they got it too, which meant that they didn't come for Hamilton this weekend. But the good news is they're coming this coming Saturday. So there is that to look forward to. I mean, in this country, our leadership is so stupid that listening to mosque laws, first of all, the government doesn't listen themselves. So I think it goes both ways. Now that there is absolutely no mandate or law at all on anything, we have to take it upon ourselves to be a bit careful. It's, yeah.
Really looking forward to spring. The first of the snow crocuses are blooming. Dad missed them by literally a day.
The snow what?
Snow crocuses?
Mm. They've been here for a
Naturalized
bit.
in the lawn, so they're just starting to come up.
Yeah.
Well, spring is on its way. In my recent break down in Cornwall in the west of England, it was which is always a way ahead of the rest of the country. The Easter primroses were out. It was quite amazing. And actually the most amazing thing at all, went to see a sort of signature collection of magnolia trees. And that's quite something when you see really, really big, tall trees, just absolutely covered in flowers. It's quite surreal. But cheers to the spirits.
Oh, nice. I'm looking forward to get the garden going.
Here in London, it's going to be 1 degree in the morning, at night tomorrow, 1. Hope it doesn't go to freezing. Plants will just go to shreds. Hello, Brandel.
Hi, Brendel.
Morning. Morning, Peter. Morning, Mark. Morning, Frode.
Morning,
Trying to
morning.
get back on the horse.
Yes. So now that we have a quorum or whatever, have you guys had a chance to look at the document I sent? And do you have any comments? Or I only sent it a few minutes before, so I expect not.
No, I didn't check mail yet.
I saw that it existed. I only just got up.
I'm just going to do a thing here.
Impressive you're with us at all then.
Oh, and in another bizarre coincidence, had it been 1 day later, the 911 service on our 3G cell phone would have been turned off. I wouldn't have been able to dial in for help. It would have taken twice as long to get to a telephone. And then I would have been blaming myself because I didn't have a phone that was working on the day that I needed the phone.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. That's good. I mean, those coincidences are amazing. Bruce Horn, whom some of you may know from our community, and also he was the guy who wrote the first Finder or the first Mac. He was out cycling a good couple of years ago and just collapsed on the bike. And if there wasn't a couple of people there who saw him, who called the right number to get the new helicopter for the new wing, there's no chance in hell he would have made it. So that was a positive series of events, just amazing. Now he's just normal and healthy, but any single chain of that, he would have not made it. Awful, yeah. So the reason I sent this document is, obviously, it would be great if we could make a major demo and we all agreed on everything to make. But I think we should at least outline a demo of things we think should be doable in such an environment. And then also write down why it cannot be done line by line. So these are the issues that would have to be sorted out. And hopefully that can help us get some advisors and sponsors.
Yeah, makes sense. And I'm an apology. I'd hoped to have made some progress on. Anyway, plan at the moment is I'm now down back into things is to use Noda and take some of the data set we played around with last year and start putting small amounts in just to test the import export and see how far we go before it, well, hopefully it all goes in. I just don't know, but I'm sort of sanguine enough that I'll take it a bit at a time rather than just dump everything in.
Good idea.
Because I think it's an interesting dog fooding exercise, and then we can, you know, if only to say, well, you know, does it, even if all the data goes in, can I do anything meaningful for it? But I think one of the things I found myself missing at the moment is having something sort of that I vaguely know and understand to play with. So where the ambiguity isn't, am I seeing everything I thought was there or not? It's sort of, you know, have it. So, okay, so I should be, the interesting thing I think is, I'm saying, put it in a better way, is I should be interested to see if I can find the things I know are there in a new environment in the way that I sort of intuit I might. And I'm sure I'll be surprised in good and bad ways.
Yeah, one of the things that Frode mentioned recently about Node that I agree with is that I don't know of the value of the great big geometric shapes and colors that the nodes require, and it's possible to kind of create a semantic sort of framework for oneself that gives those things meaning. But from my perspective, I feel like they just take up much more real estate than is necessary given the value of the labels. Unless, yeah.
Well, looking at the import, I mean, it would appear that, yeah, I mean, effectively, all the things that you give a particular type, if you're bulk importing them, will have the same customization, though. I think what I haven't worked out is how you define what a type is. I think this is where I need to dive into detail. I have a suspicion that if all things are a certain type, if you customize one, it's a sort of generalized prototype. So if you customize one thing of a type, all the other things of that type, whichever one you touch, will all be the same, which is kind of neat. Because, you know, so in a simplistic sense, I thought with the data I'm going to use, I could see the difference between, say, keynotes and short papers and long papers, which is a kind of really trivial categorization, but one that at least shouldn't be visually too confusing and too noisy. But I think you're right, Brenda. I mean, I mean, in this, I feel slightly for the people making the app, because the problem is it's really difficult to start with other than a fairly small sort of feature set and scope of things to do, because, you know, people have got to learn the app, and if you suddenly throw them sort of 3,000 or 4,000 objects, that probably is a bit of overload in terms of trying to see the wood for the trees. So I guess it's, you know, small steps.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, I think that'll be one of the really important aspects, that kind of thing. I completely agree, obviously, Randall, that having funny colors and shapes isn't really necessarily that useful. But also, one of the articles in 1.2 of the journal is on Zettelkasten, which is nice to have part of our dialogue to kind of remind us of its use. So my kind of dream is that one day we will be able to go into a space and put in an index card, and that index card can hold anything. But as is highlighted in the demo, there are so many decisions, and we're nowhere near answering many of them. You know, one of the things Mark and I talked about this morning in our other meeting was how do you hide things? You know, that'll be a big one. And how do you save layouts and so on? So the document is shared with you guys both, obviously, to have a look and to comment on the demo. If you want to rewrite, then write your own demo. Of course, you can do that. We can put it together. But also, if you want to be listed, and if so, how? I'm very wary of putting people down in community if they haven't explicitly said so. So you'll see there's a huge, big bit about me. And that's a bit not the way it should be.
Actually, apropos of the thing you mentioned, Fred, and I'd be interested to get Brendel's take on it. When we were talking about this aspect of sort of, in a sense, you hiding things, one of the things it's made me realize in terms of some of the things I'm tinkering about with is if you sometimes a sort of default assumption is if you say, well, I want us to remove some information from plot, graph, call it whatever you will. that the system that says, oh, right, what you want is the whole thing redrawn without that information. So rather than say drop, in other words, rather than just sort of remove the presence, the weight of some things, all the bits and pieces move around, and now you've lost your frame of context of where things are. And I think this is especially true when you want to look for, when you're looking for missing things. It's almost easy if things are joined by lines or, you know, visual relationship like that. It's easy to say, yes, A is connected to B. But when you're looking for, well, why, you know, why isn't the thing I expect to be here joined in some way? What, you know, why is it missing, or why is it not connected? It's quite useful to be able to sort of dial in and out different connections. And do you have a sort of view on that?
There's a really popular prevailing representation, if you've heard of React, and the system created by Java, by the JavaScript system created by Facebook. It's really taken the world by storm. Swift UI is also a very similar sort of representation, insofar as it's built around being able to take they call it diffing trees, taking the minimal difference between the previous representation and the next representation. Yeah, I don't like it. I haven't written much or any React actually before, and one of the things that I'm curious about is how it copes with attributes whose values continuously change, because it seems to be primarily stateful. My sense is that 3D stuff, or at least 3D stuff in my wildest, most optimistic imaginings, is based on dynamic constraints and relationships that aren't so much, is it in this state or that state, but what are the things that are governing the display at this moment? And to that end, I actually don't know how amenable it is to sort of the concept of statefulness per se. And yeah, so I'm going to be interested in how that changes as people. So there is, people have made React Fiber 3JS, which is a system for creating 3D things in 3JS, the library that I use on the web. But it's going to, there's a decent amount of sort of essentially recapitulation of the existing sort of statefully sort of governed applications for people to get through before they, I guess, recognize the utility of constraint-based sort of control of the display of things. I mean, I will say that it is cheaper than you would worry to just turn a bunch of things on and off, especially if they've already been kind of constructed. But it is going to be, yeah, I don't know. I just know that the problems that you're sort of anticipating are ones that I think about a lot in the context of fit for display paradigms. And
because I see Peter's hand up, but just briefly to sort of riff off that, is that because it strikes me as it's almost as much a human conceptual problem as it is a code design one, in the sense that, oh well, if I'm not showing something, then it shouldn't be included in the construction of the relationships, which is to misunderstand what one's doing, because really what you're playing with a visual layer. So, you know, it's just a view spec on the underlying data. The fact that some of it isn't actually visualized at a certain time is a deliberate choice to actually make the picture clearer, not to say that I want the whole thing. I just want you to throw it all up in the air and redraw it in a version I don't understand. But sorry, I see Peter has his hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that this is sort of why I prefer IMBA over React. In IMBA, it will regenerate the entire scene graph for the web page on the fly, but it memoizes everything that it's already processed. So as long as any parameters into a subcomponent aren't there, it'll just grab the previously computed version, but it doesn't try to spend time figuring out what the diff is between the current one and the next view. And therefore, at least it claims in its benchmarks, it's dramatically faster than React for dealing with dynamically changing environments. So I think it's the sweet spot and the right tool for what we're doing. That's why I've been putting all my development effort into that language. And I left the link to it in the sidebar, but it's very cool. It can have things that will auto render, and it's adding a new system that will basically put observers on properties. So if a property on an element changes, that can automatically trigger a function that will go and modify the state on the fly. And basically it pushes everything that you shouldn't have to think about off into the background so that you can just focus on the constraints that you're putting in place for what you're building.
And just purely visual terms, though, this is going to be a huge issue. And as I was working on that demo text to make it real, one of the things is you would probably not want to take every single piece of data and metadata freshly into a new space every time. So what you may very well do is define one wall as a timeline. That's always where you will have a timeline. And maybe you have a bookshelf wall where you can then say, when I open this particular document or room or whatever the language we'll use is, then I want you to only show books that this document has cited, for instance. We need, memory palaces are based on them being static so that we can remember where things are. So the idea of being able to hang things on specific things, I think is becoming quite useful. And I think that helps us deal with our memory issue and ownership issue of where things are, so that we have kind of like spawn points to an extent. But then after a while of having, more than one person, especially in a room, and you put this here and put that there, there's got to be a really nice way to say, okay, save that view somewhere, except for this bit, and then you can come back to it. Just like dealing with tabs and other things on a normal computer, but just in a much richer way. So yeah, that's the kind of thing I hope we can build and experiment with. For the demo, the experimenter's name is Joe, obviously based on Doug's 96.2 paper, female. We do need more females in the group, so we're gonna have to do a bit of outreach there. Is trying to make a report of the work that we as a community have done over the year. So that's proper dog fooding, right?
Totally. I haven't read the document yet, but I intend to. What I'm doing today is just putting the intermediation between the parsing of a file and the populating of the visual display of it, such that it can happen on multiple clients. So that doing that same socket connection thing. So it's sort of in the same way that like Slow Mirror has the ability to get hands and head things and very a sneaky paste, which is not my choice of words, is able to broadcast those between devices, doing the same thing with the parsing of the author file, such that whatever we have currently in place, we have the ability to be able to shuttle over a network. And then hopefully that should mean that it will be able to work if you have a connection open on a Quest, and then you drop on another client the document in, then it'll be able to be populated by way of the messages being passed over the network.
That sounds.
And that.
Well, please continue. I was just going to say that sounds amazing.
Yeah, hopefully, and then yeah, that means that one will be able to see things in that VR environment, and then start thinking about any sort of relevant onward actions. One thing that doesn't necessarily do is push changes back to it, but yeah, once we decide what are relevant semantic sort of actions to take on that body of data, then we would have the ability to push those back.
Very interesting indeed. Well, the simple thing of data matching will be very interesting. So whoops, just dropped the speaker. That was so clever. If we have a timeline wall and we have a mural, how can we get stuff in and out of there easily will be interesting over time. Because you know, like a map on the table. You know, movies can do it really easily, but how do we change the layers? I'm not trying to change the subject here. I'm just saying all these things of, if we have a placeholder thing and we can move it, how do we add to it? Sorry, I'm gonna have to pick up my speaker.
I mean, are you talking in terms of direct placement? Because it's just noodling through the thing. Okay, so I happen to have a virtual map in front of me, and I want to. I have some information I want that I have an information object that exists outside that space that I want to put into the map. I mean, in a sense that if I had a map on the wall and I wanted to stick a pin in it, I go to the box of pins and I get it out. So I guess my intuition is that the data wouldn't just appear out of nowhere. I would basically reach into the data source. Perhaps at that point, it might literally be a physical action of picking up something effectively from an inbox, so to speak, and then putting it onto a map. And then it would be interesting to have some cleverness. This is, oh, right, this is a data object, and it's a geographical object, and I know what to do with that because this display space, I'm a map, and therefore if I have geographical information, I will put it in a particular place in that display.
I have a feeling it will be maybe split between adding data and interacting with it, because Fabian said something really important recently. He said, making these things in VR, to be able to update them in at the speed of thoughts, as in, when we think, is really, really important. So yes, we should be able to put a pin down on a map for sure. That's important. And maybe draw lines and routes. But when it comes to, let's say, adding weather data, which is not an unreasonable thing to do, you probably, at least for a while, will go out of VR into a computer environment, normal computer environment, and find a way to do it there. But these things have been possible for decades now to do in 2D environments, but they haven't often been done. So I think if we can provide the tool sets of how the layers communicate to each other, but that's
just to unpick that. Sorry, I'm over talk to you. I apologize. I was just thinking in terms of what you were saying about a weather information. Is that you would be wanting to call? I mean, I suppose the two aspects is whether the information data is available, the weather data is available, because to a certain extent, the current way we tend to do this mapping is it becomes effectively a visualization layer that's laid across a map. So would it need to work differently in a 3D space? Because if the data is available, it doesn't have to be taken in and out of the space, because the data, in a sense, is available already. It hasn't got to go from a place to a place.
Well, the problem is that even today, let's say when I was trying to plan my drive across Poland, and I got help with all the Tesla power charger station things, I may have wanted to see, because it's a long drive, the weather data on top, are there going to be areas that are going to be so cold that I'm worried about my charging, for instance? That's a reasonable thing to ask. But that data is absolutely available. But I haven't seen any maps where you can really add layer on layer. Similar with timelines. I think time formats tend to change depending on where you are. So let's say for the demo here, I've written that Jo has a timeline that when she is working on this project, it's 1 year, meaning it's from the beginning of this project, because that's all that this project cares about. But she can still zoom in and out of it. So in that year, depending on how we do it, in whatever dimension, we should be able to add layers of our own dialogue, plus, horribly enough, the news or Twitter. What was the context of what was going on in the world, etc. But to be able to even get that in, I mean, as you pointed out, Brandel, doing spreadsheets, a lot of people know how to do spreadsheets, but they don't know how to program. I'm not even great with spreadsheets. I can do the basics, but maybe what we need to do is consider a way of letting Excel data through CSV or whatever it might be go in and out of this environment, so that people who could be bothered can maybe even provide that for other people. Because what scares me is we have two jobs, I think. One, raise the imagination potential. Two, try to help with infrastructures. And the first one can get out of hand if we're good enough. And there's a lot that's really hard to deliver on. But what you're doing, Mark, with the node stuff is very good, because there are plenty of issues with it, but for us to interact with some real data in a real space, and it's just simply a 3D graph, I think will help us think about these things, just like immersed, which is, in the way we're talking, very primitive, but it's real, also helped us a little bit.
I can see one other sort of, it's not it's not even a divide, but there's probably a sort of a crossing point that doesn't need to be hard edged between, going back to this idea of, weather data or something. There's a difference between, well, if I have made my own very specialized localized weather or something, which, in today's terms means that I have a file of my own, probably on my own computer that I've got. Putting that in becomes a file transfer thing, whereas something actually to the level of, show me all the Tesla charging places in Poland on a map with the weather overlaid, is something I would envisage in this day and age coming from some sort of an API. So there's a different sort of interaction, and I suppose what I'm alluding to is that there is this fuzzy boundary between stuff that almost I'm doing the equivalent of physically placing into this enhanced space.
Yeah, but Mark, the problem is
just attaching from the web internet as a whole.
Yeah, but the problem is I'm just highlighting concerns from Bint, who says we still have a lot to do in 2D. What's 3D and VR going to help? Where this kind of stuff is possible now, but it's not really usable. I cannot make a map in 2D showing whether Tesla stations and so on. It's not really available for me because I don't have a place to place it. Google Maps, I don't know how I could take weather data onto Google Maps, for instance. It's kind of crazy. Of course, Google Maps and Apple Maps have to optimize for most use, but they should be able to have a lot of data, pollution levels, crime statistics, whatever it might be, should be able to go in, and it can't be done. So it's not a VR issue at all.
Yeah.
But it's just VR can really, really, really show it in such a richer way.
I mean, one thing just occurs to me with weather, of course, is, but when you draw weather maps, it's sort of, yes, you may have point observations, but they don't lend themselves, if I draw a map of Poland, I can draw where the roads are because the roads don't move. Weather is effectively constantly on the change, and so we do approximations of it. So, but then again, there's no reason that you couldn't draw things like weather fronts. I mean, at some point, a weather front translates to a line of some kind.
No, but even weather radar,
Yeah, but okay, yes, and that would be effectively like a opacity layer if you were to draw the weather radar over the top. I mean, I suspect the latest there. It's, I mean, it's part of it that you especially someone like you or I would know how to do it. I mean, someone might give me this big glob of data. My next problem was, what do I do with it?
No, but that's entirely my point, that these things have been missed out with 2D spaces. And if we're going to look at, having different kind of, by the way, question for everyone. Let's say we are in a VR room now, full on VR or AR, it doesn't matter. And one of our walls is just a timeline. And one part of the table is just a map. What do we call those things? Whiteboards, placeholders, connections, portals? We need, I think it'd be interesting to have a name for them.
Well, one of the things that you mentioned about it before was that they're essentially framing devices. So if you have something that has a temporal component versus a geospatial, then those can be framing devices. So they could be frames, but in the sense that they have some implicit sort of structuring function over data. So you could create frames that are geospatial, and you can have frames that are interpersonal. You can have things that kind of constitute data sort of presentations, and then you can have things that can structure data presentation. And then you could sort of intermingle between those by alternating the influence of them, potentially. I don't know.
I just
So for who was the person? Was it Luke, or who has it's been presented at Future of Text or of Text Symposium before, where there are criteria, weighted criteria, and if you move elements around, then it sort of modifies the parameters such that it creates a weighting that results in that node being presented in that position. Does that ring a bell?
no, but it sounds very game-like and therefore very cool and useful.
It wasn't the people doing discourse mapping by any chance.
Oh yeah, potentially, yeah.
It also sounds a little bit like some of the ideas presented in Cyberspace First Steps.
The 92 paper? Or?
The Benedict anthology.
It's interesting how far back some of this goes. It's just one of the things actually I was doing this morning was I ran a Google Ngram on view specs only to find that it doesn't turn up at all.
Oh,
No, yeah, the 92 MIT Press. Yeah. No, it's one of those words that you could tell the provenance of somebody's ideas from their dogged determination to retain the references to Doug's particular things. Same with HLAMT, yes.
But the sad thing is, I haven't found another term that's being used that just describes this notion of, I suppose for want of a better term, visualizations, renderings of a common data set, not multiple, as many as you like, different renderings doing all sorts of different things, but just sitting atop a common data set. And it's sort of there, it's mimicked in certain ways, because you could say, if I take a Word document and I show the page settings versus the sort of WYSIWYG layout, that's a different view spec. But I don't think that's where that comes from. It's not an intent that I just have the information underneath, but I want to see it as a timeline rather than as a geographical thing.
In some sense, people do use the word, simply to use the word view. So in the software architecture sort of frame of reference, people talk about model view control and model view control. Model view model, and in those contexts, a view is a read-only representation of whatever happens to be what happens to be present within a data model, and then you have the intermediation of a controller that is able to reach in and make modifications, but the view itself doesn't. So there's that one. There was another one that I was thinking, but yeah, so that has that, but it's not necessarily. And sometimes people talk about view layers within the web. Obviously, there's the idea of responsive web design, which is the idea that a web page flexes and changes as a result of the stuff. But that's over at most 2 continuous parameters, but typically only 1 in terms of the browser width. But one of the things that some friends were talking about recently is that, for example, CSS, the system of styling that we use, is actually a much more robust abstract system, such that you can use it and my friend did use it as a mechanism for doing token parsing on an abstract syntax tree to be able to intervene on shader programs that a system I wrote builds in order to be able to introspect. So in a shader, it's a fairly weird and arcane system for programming, where rather than having iteration and loops, you write all pixels simultaneously, which means that it's very fast if you have the right architecture, which is graphics programs or graphics processors. But the fact that you don't have iteration and early out means that it's tremendously difficult to introspect it. So what he did is took a system that allows you to intervene on the shader program and then inspect the contribution of individual numbers and values on the representation within it. And the neat thing about that is he used CSS to do it. He used CSS to identify which piece we wanted to look at and kind of highlight that instead. And so it occurs to me that, like, to that end, CSS is actually a tremendously powerful concept, if only it can be broken out of its box of only being represented at best to somebody who'll have a dark theme or a light theme, and how wide is their browser and things like that. So it might be an interesting sort of, and actually I wrote about it a few years ago. It might be an interesting system for being able to kind of like identify constraints and the way in which you might want to have this thing or that thing be controlled.
It's interesting to hear you talk about shaders, because obviously, you know, I'm old enough. When you said graphics, I thought you were going to say graphics cards. We used to have them as cards, as you all know, I'm sure. But anyway,
But they still are cards. They're just most of the computer.
yeah, a good point. Yeah, there's going to be amazing things, and I think. Okay, we're missing quite a few people in the group today, which is okay. They've all been emailed the document. But if by Friday we have some comments, then there's a few people I want to send this document to. First of all, Tim Berners-Lee, because Vint has good access, and I think he would find what we're doing really interesting. It overlaps with his highlights of ownership in VR, but he thinks more ownership of personal data, of course, but very related issues. So once we have a couple of good advisors, both young and pioneers, then we can look a bit into funding. And once we have a little bit of funding, we can do a bit more outreach, cover some of our costs, but also hire people to do the programming that isn't fun.
Yeah, I think the fact that Vint is actually a bit of a skeptic about VR is also a tremendously useful resource as well to really dig into to figuring out what can be done to bring him around, because I think it's a really valuable kind of provocation. Like what is it that VR does? My sense is like space. I think space is very valuable for being able to kind of present options and flexibilities of representation, but that's still a fairly diffuse answer.
Well, yeah, no, but that's a diffuse, that is where we are. And that, you know, when we talk about not knowing, you know, we've all looked at it enough to know that there's a huge amount we just don't know. But I think, you know, based on the work you did with the .liquid file, to be able to open up a .liquid and an Oculus in a really easy way through maybe one web link or something. I think I'll just have to send Vint an Oculus and say, plug in, go to this address in the browser. This is an example of, you know, it's almost like it opens up and you have the glossary map here. You have the references maybe to the side and then a graphic for the document, just something simple to indicate that. And so, okay, you can't actually do anything now. Please, can we have $1 million so we can make it possible to do something with it?
Yeah.
Because it was shocking how, yeah, it was just shocking how immersive this stuff is at the same time as being primitive. And Peter, as we have discussed via emails, when you're ready for your Oculus, we'll make it happen. As long as you don't walk around, you don't get nauseous. At least
Yeah.
that's my experience and Mark's experience.
Yeah. No, I think the most interesting thing was seeing a picture of someone wearing a set doing this, which is I've noticed a good way of fiddling with the this interesting sort of temporary technical thing of the focal positioning, which is, but it does mean you stand in an odd way. Peter's got his hand up.
Yeah, since my 3G cell phone is now officially dead, if anyone want to drop me an email with advice on what I should replace it with, it'd be appreciated.
What brand phone was it?
Oh, it was just a track phone, old style flip phone. I liked it because it reminded me of the Star Trek communicators from the 60s.
Emily just bought a new iPhone a couple of months ago, and we agreed that you should buy the cheapest and smallest, because at this point you don't really need anything else. You know, we have big displays when we need it. Why you know, I'm carrying around the 11 here. I got it through an insurance upgrade. It's an amazing device. It's just not necessary. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I haven't bought a phone since 2011, because I get them. But the thing that I'm on right now is the 10s, the iPhone 10s, and yeah, I think that smartphones are very valuable and that they are ready to hand for useful information, but they're in many places more captivating than they are useful. But I wouldn't go without it. So I think you should get a smartphone. If you are already bought into aspects of the Apple ecosystem, then Apple makes it very, very, very good. I also actually get much more out of an Apple Watch than I would have expected.
That's kind of
again,
surprising, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it was my job to sell them or make the website that sold them for many years, and they were like, you have to have one to be able to understand it. So that was nice of them.
I think that that's good.
What's that LiDAR thing that some of the Apple phones have in them, and is it good for anything?
Yeah, it's exceptionally good for object capture. So on the back of, did you say 11 or 11 Pro photo? So
Oh, just
there.
11 small, just that.
Right. So that one doesn't have the LiDAR, but the Pro models, the iPhone 12 and 13 both have LiDAR on the back, and that means that you have a much higher fidelity capacity for object tracking on the back. The face, the true depth sensor on the front has a pretty good capacity for doing tracking, but it's primarily sort of oriented toward facial tracking and at that relative distance. You know, the Microsoft it's a shrunk down Microsoft Kinect effectively, but very, very shrunk down, obviously. But as such, it has the structure of those things is tailored toward specific distances and scales. So the Pro model is really, really interesting insofar as it's got great cameras for photogrammetry, and you can call it stereo photogrammetry or whatever else, which allows you to do the RGB based, like color image based sort of construction of things. And the currently fairly clearly beta software that Apple released last year, Object Capture, is phenomenal for being able to create objects from that. But then so that's the sort of thing that you can do at a sort of a quarter-acre scale. You can capture sort of the size of an entire house. For a room, you have.
See how blurry the background is behind you guys?
Yeah,
It works quite well.
Yeah, so that actually what do they call it? Portrait mode is from partly just the disparity mapping. So having the ability to have 3 really good quality cameras that it has very, very clear sort of control over and knowledge of, means that it can it can do disparity mapping for depth estimation and things like that in a phenomenally accurate way. So yeah, I really think the iPhone is a great platform, particularly if you want to write stuff or do any sensing things. And the Pro models and the additional sensing capabilities they have are limited only by the things that people can think of to do with them. And unfortunately, we're at a point in technological history where there's more technology to be had than people know what to do with. So helpful if you can program, if you can write stuff that can control that stuff, but otherwise there's a long set of functionality that exists in those things, and it will remain relevant for many years to come in terms of what people will be able to kind of envision and build with LiDAR and other technology. So yeah, if I may sell an iPhone to you, then they're great.
It's
So can you
very-
actually like create a model of something and get inside a Blender?
Sorry?
Can you actually scan something in 3D and then get inside a Blender so that you could do something with the model? Or
Yes.
How-
Oh, by all means, by all means. So Apple is working. So Object Capture is this application, like I said, that was released last year. It's beta such that you can expect that it will be integrated into ways that are much more seamless for people to use. It was made by an R&D division and looks like it. I mean, it looks like an Apple R&D division, but it's not like Notes or Mail yet in terms of that kind of level of function. But it allows you to export USDs and USDZs, which are now have first-class interoperability inside the Blender, so that you can open those up and animate them, export them as whatever else. I believe, I haven't done it myself because I don't have a LiDAR phone yet, that it also does some level of construction of the physically based rendered channels, the PBR channels, that you can then use to estimate things like roughness and metalness rather than just the pure albedo, which is a funny word, but means the sort of reflectance terms, what things look like, so that you get some rough sense of whether an object was actually shiny and things like that. And that's a phenomenally important, because it means that the objects that you create are just that much more flexible and versatile for being able to be put in different lighting environments and get a sense of the materiality of those things. So yeah, really neat. And there's a lot more to come from that group in terms of both the ease of use of that as well as the sort of the domain of application. One of the things I hope they can do at some point is reduce the polygon count of those things in a semantically valid way and improve the topological flow of the vertices on it. But that's a little arcane for this discussion.
So
Do
the
any of
current
you-
generation of hardware will keep getting better as they improve the software going forward. In other words, do you think it'd be something where in a year I'd be wanting to trade in one if I got the current generation for something newer, would be good for a while?
Only if it works better in concert with the AR/VR headset. Do you agree with me, Brandel? If they've done some special
Well,
integration?
I would say it depends. Like everybody else, like a lot of people want a new phone every year, but you won't be left holding a bag in terms of the relevance of the device. Like I said, I'm still keeping up with my iPhone XS, which is 2018, I think.
Yeah, I'm on a 10 here and not feeling left behind.
Right. So to that end, there are features that change. So the 10S no longer does ray traced shadows in ARKit, for example, in AR Quick Look and things, whereas things 11 and above permit the ray tracing of those things and have a slightly more robust algorithm for depth of field estimation. But those things are sort of provided relatively seamlessly. You can be relatively guaranteed that the longer you wait, the better the phone will be that is available. But it's not, there's not ever, confidently saying it with Apple stuff, there's not ever going to be a moment where if you buy something that is new now, that it will be irrelevant in 6 months. It's, you can no longer use the iPhone 6, essentially. But that was the 2014 vintage, and as such is 8 years old. and but you can use the 2017 vintage that Mark has and the 2018 that I have. So yeah.
Just like with desktop publishing back in the day and writing basic word processing back in the day, there was a point where a computer could do it. So the next year's model wouldn't actually improve any of that work. I think we're currently at that with smartphones for current use. There isn't really, I mean, yes, the new one's got a bit better camera or something like that, but what's I think really interesting is to properly look at all these different devices. Like Brandel was saying, he's surprised at the utility of his Apple Watch. Me too. And Emily, my wife, she absolutely loves her, and she desperately didn't want it. I had to give it to her as a present for Christmas. She was really annoyed that I wasted all that money. And now, you know, one of the key features of it is click to hear a ping from your phone, because you can't remember where she left her phone. But, you know, just getting messages, and Siri works phenomenally well on it. But another interesting thing is I stupidly bought the small Pro iPad last year, hoping we could put Author on there. Couldn't do that. I just couldn't afford it. So we have that. We don't use it as much. But the iPad mini, because that's more carryable, becomes of a higher utility, because, you know, there are so many devices now that kind of overlap in use. So we kind of have to decide for ourselves where to use them. But I can't imagine this time next year that these LiDAR and camera things will definitely somehow be used with the AR or VR headsets. You know, it should be trivial to scan your own room at high quality to begin with. And, you know, I expect, you know, the Apple AirPods, which are phenomenal, which have spatial audio, which is so important in VR, they will probably be used too. The Apple Watch, I don't know how will be used, but it'll probably be used. I think that's one of the key things Apple will do, come out with a headset that works well. But if you use it with these other additional expensive Apple devices, it'll give you more.
I think because funny if you mentioned, I was trying to work out the Apple, the newer EarPods spatial thing, and I think certainly with the phone, I think that needs something new. So one thing that gets confusing now, given that phones are essentially good enough, is there are several different things rolling along. There's how much slower your phone gets over time as the newer OS adds more powerful things on it, because it's predicated on a slightly faster chip. Yeah, it's just much progress. Whether your usage, you fall into the group where you tend to do for your battery in very short order. Well, that's not a problem I personally have had, but I know some people do. So the point at which I think you end up upgrading is you've either just, you know, is it worth putting a new battery in or not, or is it actually you might as well, it's time to get a new phone, or you ding the screen or something. I sort of looking back, that's basically how the thing has come about. It's not been OMG must go and stand in a queue outside the store.
It's really interesting to have this discussion in our group right now, considering our VR focus, because in a VR space, you can have any darn phone you want. And I think that's really, really important, because in a VR space, you will need something that mentally, at least, is tangible to interact with, at least for a period of time. Maybe at some point we'll be floating in colors, which could be hugely valuable over time as our bodies and brains adjust to it. But that's why we're not talking about these frames, or as Peter suggested, I just saw in chat, monitors. You know, there will be things in VR space, and we need to handle them and interact with them. And we can fantasize as much as we want, but until we can test a few, it'll be just pure speculation.
I think it has to be, because sometimes not, I mean, it's that chicken egg problem, really. Not until you've built it did you discover it was either much easier than you thought, or more often than not, much harder than you thought.
Oh, exactly.
And then the affordances begin to suggest themselves.
Yeah, exactly. That's why we have to get money, so that Brandel can do the interesting stuff. But there's so much behind the scenes of not only data transfer and storage, but, you know, how things relate to each other. There's so much that needs to be done. And if we have something viable and useful and interesting, maybe we can even patent some of it to make sure it stays open. So if some of the big guys try to do the same things, just sorry, dudes, you know, we have, this is now for posterity or whatever. Because it is, when I close my eyes and try to be this Joe character, it's like, okay, have that there and have that there. It's so limited. So yeah, thinking in terms of devices. So Peter, your question is, which phone device would you like to have in your VR world?
And on that note, I should be bowing out. I have to help Mom with a lot of paperwork now.
Okay, yeah, we are thinking of you. It's tough, but thinking about you, Peter.
I don't know what's going to happen Friday, but if possible, I'll try to come in at least for a little bit. So we'll see
Yeah,
how
yeah.
it goes.
It'll be nice to see you, but don't feel any obligation, okay?
Yeah.
And if you want to meet separately, we're available, obviously.
Okay, thanks a lot, guys.
See ya.
Take
Bye.
care.
Yeah, I really appreciate all your warm thoughts. Means a
No
lot.
worries. Good.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.
I don't know if you knew Brandel, but Peter recently lost his father, so that's what he was.
That's very hard.
Yeah, it is.
And it's difficult. It's sort of one of those things that actually something happened that in the grand scheme of things really probably was inconsequential, but just feels like, oh, if only I'd done, X. But, been there.
Yes. No, I've been involved with people sort of what if those things had been like this, and what if those things had been like that? Well, they weren't, and it is difficult, but yeah.
I wonder, in terms of culture and emotion, at what age, when you lose your parents, are you no longer orphaned? You're just an adult. It's all very bizarre.
Yeah.
But
Well, well, it's funny you say that. I mean, I think back to, certainly, I suppose, well, I lost my mother much younger, so it's a different thing. But, when my father died in adulthood, there was that sense of, okay, not because he was the last parent, but sort of that sense of, okay, so now we pass through a door you don't come back through. Now there is no one to lean on. In a sense, you are now the top of your little evolutionary tree. And that's a sort of, I don't think people talk about it or something, but it was definitely a sort of an emotion or a sensation that I recall at the time.
yeah, I'm scared shitless. I've lost my father. My mother's now in her late 80s. She's doing very well, but at some point, that'll happen. So it's tough. But I have to say, with the work we're doing, sitting here in Europe, Mark and I, and one of my close friends had to go to Poland to pick up his parents, and watching this quite close by, I just think what we're doing is just much more important. We have a magic I don't know what the fancy word is, magic potion almost.
Elixir, yeah.
Elixir, thank you. And human beings, our greatest power is imagination. It really is. And we are about to waste it. And Brandel, that's why your deep dismissal of current state of affairs and questioning is so vital to this. So the whole lab thing we're doing, my background is as artist, Chelsea School of Art, human computer interaction, blah, blah, blah. I want to make a Mont Blanc pen. I want to make another version of Author. I want to create tools. That's what I want. But I know what we need is to support each other in the dialogue that can make other people make even better tools. So,
Right. Yeah, well, that's the thing that I think is important to key into is with Vint objections is what are the basic propositions, and how do you communicate them clearly? Because it can be easy to mistake the sort of the fundamental shifts that virtual reality support as just being sort of dazzled by the novelty of it, rather than, I mean, it is dazzled by the novelty, though. It's just that it doesn't go away. It's that once you realize that, then it can become mundane, and traditional computing can become not just mundane but also disappointing. I don't know.
It may also be that because to a certain extent the most obvious I mean, I know there's some work in medicine and in things like architecture and things. So by and large, probably to the woman or man in the street, it's sort of entertainment and games. Sort of perhaps sort of makes it seem a bit frothier than it really is. But you know, I look at the things that have just come along in my sort of adult lifetime. You know, who'd have thought we'd all be, you know, walking around carrying mobile phones? I mean, it's just insanity, isn't it? I mean, no one's going to do that, and that is just passed through. And living through the, you know, first 10 years of the web, when people say, "Well, what's that?" So you use a telephone to talk to people via a computer. Why don't you pick up a phone? You know, and it's so alien. I mean, I suppose that's why I keep I keep finding myself being drawn back to this notion of views and view specs, or whatever one calls them. This is the problem. I haven't found a term for it, from the human rather than the software. And because, and I'm sorry, I know I keep mentioning Tinderbox, but by happy accident, I find myself sitting in a community where there's a tool that for a long time has offered that, but I still find myself explaining to people, but I only use this view and I want to do that. And they said, well, why don't you just do that? It's the same data. And it takes an awful, I mean, this is the thing I keep reflecting on. I'm constantly relearning the fact that people find it really hard to consider that the same thing can be two different things or more at once. But that's something that AR and VR is going to unlock, is going to bring even more to the fore. So, you know, from the human side of it, there's an element of what we're doing that we clearly need some addressing. Because to a certain extent, you know, even if we get all the technology right, we've got to get the human meat bags up to speed as well.
Yeah, I was just watching the other night a documentary series called "The Machine That Changed the World." I think it was broadcast as "The Dream Machine" in the UK, which maybe means it's related to the book "The Dream Machine." But one of the things that I hadn't heard, my wife, it's about computer history, and my wife sort of confusedly said, "Don't you know everything about computer history? Like, was there literally anything to learn in it?" Because I have read a lot about it. But one of the things that was really interesting about it, first was that I don't know if you've heard of the Lion Company in the UK was the first commercial seller of computers.
Yeah.
Because they recognized that their like tea and jam company would need it, and so obviously everybody else would as well. But another really interesting thing that Lion and the Univac sellers, first the folks Eckert, and then the folks who bought it at Remington Rand, that everybody was really frustrated and disappointed with having computers, because then it turned out that programming computers was so hard. This was before Fortran and COBOL, so there was no programming language to do it at all. There was not even sort of assembly language level kind of representations that people were able to kind of manipulate. But to me, that was really interesting because, yeah, you sort of underscored that the models of thinking, just however expensive, they were $250,000 in $1951 at that time. But by far the more expensive thing was the fact that nobody knew how to think with them properly. I feel like that's an incredibly relevant component of computing history, is that the mental models that were unlocked by different programming environments and runtimes had the ability to increase by many orders of magnitude the people who could be involved with them. And you know, that I think culminating with spreadsheets, I think that's the place where the most people at this point have the most flexible capacity for intervening on computer information. I'm not sure. I mean, maybe Word has people being able to manipulate stuff, but for the most part, when people are using phones, they aren't changing things, and they aren't changing things as they relate to a large corpus in a meaningful sense. They're sort of providing their own Instagram feed and hinting, but not through a mode that means that they're aware of their impact. So I would say that the high watermark, while it's not the most recent mark, is is spreadsheets in terms of people being able to kind of see and change stuff. And I think that, yeah, if we can recognize what it is that people actually think, what it is that people need to do with stuff, then we can take that even further. But yeah, still interested in what. Can you tell me a little bit more, Frode, about what Vint says?
Yeah, he basically says there's so much information management stuff we can do in normal screens that hasn't been really done yet. And I completely agree with him on that. Obviously, we all agree. But my thinking is I'm 53 years old, I think, something like that. And, you know, I've done tiny piddly little things in my life, but I feel, even though I'm not Doug Engelbart, of course, but I share one emotion, and that is, he told me he climbed up to a mountain, saw the future, and ran back down to try to explain to people what's happening. But he felt that he had too big hands. He couldn't, for some reason, it was his hands, it was too big. He couldn't really make people understand. I feel similar to that. And, you know, at a certain point, you have to stop doing something that doesn't work. So that's why I think the metaverse, or whatever we're going to call it, has an incredible opportunity for the general public to think, this is a new thing. We can do new things. So yes, if someone gave me 10 million, I would spend it on making Author better. Of course I would, and marketing that. And we can do better spreadsheets. We can do better graphs on a computer. Of course we can. So I completely agree with them, except for what you said earlier, like the Apple Watch, tiny thing, but it's a new dimension, and it actually helps us, right? And I am convinced that being able to deal with things in a space will be much more powerful. But the more I work on writing our demo and thinking about it, fake 3D, like Second Life, is really messy. 3D world is messy. So we're going to have to spend real time thinking about how to organize your virtual office. So, you know, that's why we're talking about these frames and things like that. So when it comes to Vint, I think that, yeah, once we can open something easily in Oculus for him, I'm just going to have to bite the bullet and just send him an Oculus. You know, he's supported me in the past. Once I asked to finish Author, he sent me $10,000 in a day, because he saw that was the last thing. So for me to send him a whatever $100 Oculus, I don't think is outrageous. But I don't want to send it. All he's going to see is, you know, Horizons workrooms or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. One thing I linked. If you're not familiar with this, then this is something that I come back to a lot. Is the model? Do you know what it represents? These pictures?
Yeah, very familiar.
That tells us that what we understand with our brains, what our brains are literally built and structured in priority of, is what happens from and to our hands. And so it means that while it's definitely the case that there's a lot to be done in terms of data manipulation, view specs, and those kinds of things, it should still be done with our hands, even if it's not in 3D. So iPads are very, very interesting, but we have such a woeful dearth of real insight about what intrinsically multi-touch and multi-point manipulation might look like for reasonable data manipulation. That I think it is a terrible stumbling block in terms of our appreciation of the way we can know about things. But I think, as I said before, like Vint is one of the like archetypes of people who have learned to make those concessions. And so to that end, it may actually not be much more easy for him because of the way his brain now works after 50 years of at least 50 years of imagining the way in which one sort of intervenes on things within a digital space. But the fact of the matter is that he's had 50 years to learn that, and other people don't. But what everybody does have is a brain that's structured in priority, more like these somatosensory and motor homunculi. And so if we think about what hands are and what bodies are and space is, as we sort of deal with information, with writing, with text, with data, then it will be better for more people.
Oh, absolutely agree with you. He's been too programmed. I think he would agree with that. And because he's learned to live with that. My father, who was not very digital, who did very, very well within business, his mindset was, the world is thus, I want to succeed. My mindset is, the world is thus, that's annoying. You know, obviously he became a success for living within it. So for him to learn new paradigms, like the first time I tried to explain to them a mouse and a cursor, both him and my mother, you didn't tell me that thing moved that, you know, and because of that one thing happening once, it really slowed down their interest in learning as well, because it just seemed like a weird paradigm. But on the positive side, the Mac multi-touch trackpad is amazing. You know, it's just a tiny bit, but oh my gosh, to be able to do this, that, and it's incredible. Yeah.
Thinking on the sort of, your picture, the homunculus model. I mean, I was just trying to think, a lot of things when we think about touch and the motor skills in the hand is we sort of think about sort of texture and pressure and sort of physical activities. I mean, the annoying thing in my mind is just at the time when we really could do it. The fact that we stopped thinking about things like knowledge management, knowledge spaces, when the web came along, and all that stuff sort of went off to pasture, is a real shame. Because so one of the questions that comes to me from you bringing up the model idea is okay, so what aspects of this amazing extra manipulative control best lend themselves to the malleability of this abstract thing that is information and knowledge? I mean, it's not that we're going to build our personal Zettelkasten in the form of a swing ball set. So there is that sort of question as to which parts of this skill are most pertinent to this new environment. And my gut feeling is it won't be the ones that you immediately go for, simply because of the things that we more normally use our hands for, sort of, sporting activities and sort of physical contact. The manipulative things we do every day and the sort of coffee cup you pick up without thinking about it, literally is, those are the things you do with less immediate thought, and yet are the incredibly powerful things that we don't have in our 2D space, such as where sort of, in a sense, Vince saying it's kind of good enough at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Writing a note, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've said Lakey abstractions before here, but it's something that I'm on a bit of a tear, sort of using as an introduction to it, is that when we're presented with the world, when we're presented with a tangible space, there's always more information to be had from a more prolonged and closer investigation of a thing. So when you look at your coffee cup, then you can see aspects of its function. You can see surface details, defects, hallmarks, the little imprinting on the bottom that says which hall it was made in. And your manipulation of that coffee cup isn't dependent on your awareness or ability to kind of read those things, but they all exist nevertheless. So AirPods Pro, they have I don't know that it's a thundering success, but they have the regulatory information for what the AirPods work like is printed somewhere on the inside of it. You don't need to know about that, and that's why they did it, because they wanted to sort of skirt the rules for that. But information displays of data at this point expect you to be cognizant of or be required to be cognizant of all of the details in them right now. And I deeply resent that. I think that it means that that's just an incredibly opinionated view of information designers and presenters to say, like, you need to know about all of this, and all of this is what you need to know about. Like, no, I need more. Thank you. And so having representations that lend themselves to being able to have, like you say, Frode, the glanceability, but also the prolonged inspectability, the idea that there's more and less at the same time, is something that I think is pivotal for recognizing the way that sort of current generation paradigms are selling the ability to jump into those things short. It's not intrinsically to do with the fact that the interfaces are good enough, but that the interfaces are good enough for a very terrible series of concessions as to what it is we're doing with the information that we're interacting with.
Absolutely. I want to get to a point where I don my headgear in the morning to quote unquote read the news. And one of the things I'll have is a map next to me that will instantly be my neighborhood, where it will have, of course, traffic information, maybe weather, or in general. It'll also have, you know, if my local supermarket has a special offer and I actually want to know about that, that might be indicated. If there are any police reports near my son's school, what, you know, as many stacks as I want, you know, so I should be able to make it messy. As you said, I should be able to visually inspect that at a glance to see if there's anything useful or not, anything pertaining to me, you know, wipe it away. I'm now in work mode. I don't actually need a map, or later on I do, there's something else. Every item should carry as much information as possible. You know, if I'm reading, yeah, it's just, we so strongly agree. I mean, the texture of paper means something when you read in some cases. You know, that needs to come back. There are so many levels of this, but you can't have it if you can't have it. If you can't address it, you can't address it. You know, so how we move it around, how we store it, how we interact with it. It's kind of amazing how all of that has to be done from scratch now. You know, so it's, yeah, anyway. You know, I made this globe thing. Did I tell you? For islands?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, I'll hang on. Yeah, it was called Live Globe, and I got to use a framework by a geo guy who stopped supporting it after a while. I think he got annoyed at me because I asked him to do things. The idea was really simple. So we took a map of the world, you know, a geographic map, no land, no country borders.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so it also had the ocean depth, but I decided that wasn't as relevant. So I painted all the ocean in a layer blue, looked at the opacity, so you could still see where it's deeper, but not too much. And as you remember, you would tap on a place to see what it was, country, or you zoom in, you get the city outline. But also if you tapped on a name, then it would flip around and you would have a graph for all the standard statistics, such as surface area, population, if it's a city or whatever, and then you could compare with another of the like. So if you had two oceans, you could do that, and the lines would go back. So you would learn what the categories are. They would all be horizontal. And if you compare two places, you would get these two shapes. So you could instantly say, here, the education level is high, but they have pollution, you know, or whatever it might be. There are so many things that can be done with that. The spider graph, so and all kinds of things, which are completely abstract, of course, but it can map onto more realistic spaces.
That's really cool.
You know, we should be able to easily, you know, I do strongly believe in the power of a document. You know, as a background of, as an artist, I remember when I was a teenager and my art teacher got annoyed at me because there was an exhibition and I had an image on a table and then I did this. And it was interesting and she liked it, but she said, at a certain point, you have to stop. Not just in time, but there has to be a frame. If it isn't framed, it isn't a piece of work. Right? I just thought that was fascinating. And I just lost my train of thought entirely there. But anyway.
Yeah, there's a frame and a pedestal and a plinth, all of those things that sort of dictate the boundary of what is the work and what isn't the work are interesting sort of issues and questions. I mean, one thing, just thinking about the about what 3D does is that I think I saw somebody link recently that Fred P. Brooks Jr. said that the desktop metaphor is more actually the airplane seat metaphor, in terms of the ability that one would have to manage a series of documents while sitting in economy class next to two people.
That's funny. True.
Just in terms of the amount of space one actually has to be able to kind of manipulate those things, and frankly, it's barely ameliorated by larger display sizes because they're still sort of shoulder width. They're not such that you have the ability to kind of really move those things around to any substantial degree. And that's I think that's the raison d'être for Microsoft Surface, but it's not something that's been connected to real work, because Microsoft Research is essentially almost a basic research wing rather than an applied one. But the full size Surface tables, not the Microsoft Surface tablets, but the thing that's the size of an air hockey table or a small pool table are really the thing that they were sort of thinking about and envisioning. But the economics of it are such that people get too squeamish, seriously considering sort of devoting such a large kind of display surface and working area to a single individual. But it would be interesting if you think about the sort of the smallest size IKEA desk tables, and if that is an entire display surface, what it is that one would actually do on that, as opposed to plopping a computer onto it, which is barely shoulder width.
I think it's interesting, but I think a lot of the space will be wasted just by your hands. But one thing I wondered about is, why can't software easily detect that two iPads have touched each other? So you could certainly have one bigger screen if you're working with someone else. We have the control thing now. We can do the cursor to your own things, but it would be really nice to. I originally thought about playing a game, a tabletop game that they work across.
Yeah, well, hopefully they would. I mean, I would hope as well. I don't know if iPads have the ultra wideband chip, but the ultra wideband chip that's in the latest generation phones and AirTag are able to give a really high fidelity representation of the orientation and relative orientation and position of all of the devices with relation to one another. Which means that if you have multiple iPads, then you would actually be able to kind of, not just if they were exactly parallel, but even if they were askew a little bit, or actually on different angles in terms of the facing surface, possible to kind of resolve those in pretty short order, such that you could create a synthetic surface. Yeah, I think that point of wasting is a really apt one, because most of the sort of innovations in computing is when people have had the audacity to be as wasteful as they could imagine of a current resource. And the people who were threatened with expulsion for writing a word processing application were case in point. That secretarial work and not deserving of the austere and reverent kind of regard we should have for what computers are.
Or Andy Van Dam's thing about the first being told at Brown, this is a computer for serious work, not for doing philosophy on.
Right, exactly. And so so getting into the mood of really wasting pixels, I think would be I don't think we've really ever wasted pixels to the extent that we should. We've wasted cycles, we've wasted bytes. We've certainly wasted watts, but we haven't really managed to get quite as profligate with our pixels as we ought to, I think.
That's a very good point.
And it's interesting because the point that you brought up before, that in a sense you don't need massive fidelity everywhere all the time. And thus far, what we've tended to, so we've got our however many K we're on at the moment screen, and even the thing in the farthest corner that's, in your peripheral vision is still being calculated with the same fidelity as the thing right in your focal point. And there's a lesson, I think, in that for us, in how we become more usefully wasteful of our pixels as well.
Oh, that's fascinating. I hadn't thought about this. So people call that concept foveated rendering. So Oculus currently does it as, they call it fixed foveated rendering. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but if you look into the periphery of most of your applications, then it'll be of a much lower fidelity. So not just because of the Fresnel lensing that you observed in the past, Mark, but because of the fixed foveated rendering, with the expectation, all other things being equal, that you'll be trying to look through the center of your vision, the center of your eye holes. That's the best place to put that thing. So fixed, that means that you can get roughly twice to more fidelity in the center of it. But with eye trackers on a monitor, there's no reason you wouldn't be able to do that in 2 dimensions as well, actually. So if you're looking at your great big 32-inch screen or 27-inch screen or whatever they are, if you're looking up there, then if you have something that has a devoted kind of resource for actual eye tracking, you could foveate a 2D desktop as well, in order to make sure that you're not squandering resources on something that's 45 degrees away from your central vision. That would be fascinating.
By the way, question for you guys. If Apple releases a large display tomorrow, are you guys tempted?
I don't buy things.
Yeah. Well, what? You just get it delivered when you need it?
I mostly don't. I mostly just use things that are old until they fall over. In New Zealand, it's the most remote country in the world, so we mostly have a pretty good reputation for just using things, driving them into the ground, and so I tend to do that with most of my devices. I am on my second display, but that's because I had to upgrade my Mac from the thing that I got in 2014. My company issued one, and my 2019 issued one didn't have the ports. It was a Thunderbolt one, and it doesn't have it anymore. So I tend to make do until the last possible moment. And so if there's a specific thing that means that my current set of needs are suddenly inadequate, then that will cause me to upgrade. But otherwise, no.
But if I point this to Fred, for obvious reasons, given who's in the room, but I'm wondering, in a sense, the main thing I see with ScreenStill at the moment is a real use for stuff like video and visually creative work, where you want to be able to have immense power and detail and color control and stuff. And yet everything we've just been talking about isn't in that area at all. What we really want is probably a very large foveated display. What we want is to have effectively, if you think things like spatial hypertext maps, so effectively you want an unlimited display that just shows the bit you're looking at, and having a wider and the system it lives in or in which it exists, having a knowledge of which bit of this limitless space you're looking at, and knowing what information needs to go there, which strikes me as a very different paradigm to where we are with our current 2D screens.
It is, but the thing is, to state kind of the obvious, is, well, personally, when I write, I prefer a 13-inch screen because it means my eyeballs move, not my head. And that's that. When I edit, of course, it's a different situation. But also, to say the obvious, I think there's such a huge difference between a large screen, as I used to work with my images, and a VR environment, because the ability to just place things everywhere just multiplies it by 1 billion. It's such a completely different thing. I would not want to spend too much effort on a large screen, whether horizontal or vertical, because I think that the lack of resolution but increase of where you put it in VR is so big.
Well, thinking the irony of the desktop metaphor of computing, I no longer run out of screen space. I run out of desk space in front of my screens to put all the contingent bits of information, or even if it's just a Reggie coffee cup, but literally things that are pertinent to what I'm doing on the screen. You know, and that's something I didn't think about when I was wondering whether I, you know, go for a slightly bigger cathode ray tube monitor, you know, to get those extra pixels on the screen. You know, because desktop was all, but actually it's now literally the physical space in front of my monitors that I'm looking to upgrade.
Yeah. So to that end, you're talking about these peripheral foveated displays and things like that. Hrvoje Benko, and actually the fact that he's at Facebook now makes me much more interested in Facebook, but in what he could possibly be pursuing there, because he's a clever guy. His work, and if you look at the short videos there, then he's the person who's managed to make the most constructive use of foveated display systems. You know, he was responsible in large part for Illumiroom. I believe Lightspace is also another one like that. I don't know that I have seen it, but it's 2010, so there's a good chance. I have basically watched all of these, but I'm not sure. But he's done very, very interesting stuff about, yeah, he's got another one from 2012 here saying, make every surface a touchscreen.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was the thing that was presented at CHI at WIST 2011. So yeah, those are the kinds of things that I think are very interesting in sort of investigating. And to that end, it's investigations of that flavor that are relevant, I think, the most relevant in virtual reality.
And I think they're also good in that they offer, I don't know what's the phrase, people like to say, a provocation to some of our sort of, our just to some, you know, because in a sense, I sometimes feel that not so much in this forum, but I hear people saying, yeah, well, the main advantage of something like VR is I'm going to have a 100-foot, you know, 5K screen. I'm thinking, no, that's sort of thing. You could, but that's not what it really has to offer for us. So things that break us away from basically a bigger version of what we have in front of our eyes at the moment, I think is a useful way of thinking.
Yeah, and to get to the point where we at least get to see the practical consequences of what that bigger is.
Mm.
I just wrote a note there about the thing we said earlier about memory palaces only work because there is a there. And I think it'll be interesting for us to look at those things, because that's maybe one of the things that companies will populate really quickly is their own theirs. But yeah, I clicked on your link. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Oh, to some of the it's not one specific piece of work, but obviously Illumiroom was explicitly sort of, you know, within the context of entertainment, but Hrvoje Benko was at MSR, now at Facebook, Meta Research, whatever you want to call it, and he's done the most interesting work about taking pixel grids out of a small display, either by having a shoulder-mounted projector camera, that means that you have a thing here, or by having a very large region that you can then think about the sort of the function of as you're kind of arranging those things. And so, yeah, like I would be very interested in a foveated display such that you have, you know, this, and then you keep your monitor, you know, and maybe 13 inches is okay once you have that. But you know, it occurs to me that if you think about the value of those pixels as being the same as those ones, then it's always going to be more expensive. It's always going to be too expensive to be able to do that. One of the things that I've been musing on recently is when people will start installing pixel grid drywall, you know, Gibboard or whatever they call it in the UK, that actually has some level of fidelity display capability, sort of as a first class component of it, because yeah, like I'm still at the point in my life where I'm stuck in rental hell, which means that I live my life and all of my peers live their lives in rental beige. But one benefit of that is that it's an ideal projection surface, and it would be neat for people to recognize the utility that can come from actually constructing capabilities targeting that. But I haven't done that work myself, so I
A step towards a personal holodeck. Though I must say, if science fiction has taught me anything, they're a health and safety nightmare.
oh yes, no, I feel like there would have been a number of inquests. No, I think just wallpaper would be an interesting start. Dynamic wallpaper.
Yeah.
Where is it? I bought in combination with that that handheld projector. I bought this Chrome bulb a few months ago so that I can project onto it and then have a large reflection up on the ceiling, which takes a relatively limited 2-to-1 throw from this projector and is able to cast, albeit dimly because it's not a very bright projector, an entire ceiling's worth of stuff. The interesting thing about that is then even so with a reflection surface like this, it's pretty understandable, pretty knowable what the resulting image up on the screen that is. But even if it weren't, even if you were to just project onto some crinkled up tinfoil, aluminium foil, you'd have the ability to recalibrate by sort of looking at it to figure out what consequent kind of reflected image is, and then through whatever convolution matrix, be able to figure out how to create any given image for whatever sort of capabilities you have to display on different regions of the screen of the environment as a consequence. And
Really?
and the other thing about that is that those become pure additive. If you throw more tinfoil with more projectors into the room, you have the ability to just have those work in concert with one another, provided you're able to have proper sort of temporal synchronization. And then you get to instrumental space. You get to be able to create a fairly impromptu cave with a minimum of componentry. Then, if you have the ability to be able to do programmatic lensing, something that I've been musing about. I don't know if it's made an appearance in here, but shortly after Valentine's Day, there was the local supermarket gave away all of its Mylar balloons because they weren't going to sell them, and so I made a neutral buoyancy sort of thing where you weight it exactly so that it neither sinks nor floats. I don't know how many people do that, but I've done it out to every single Mylar balloon I've ever had, and so I'm confused as to why it's not sort of more of a mainstay in terms of like making sure that they get you all of the neutral buoyancy weighting for it at the moment that you buy it. But anyway, one of the things that would be very interesting with that is that it's a pretty good reflective surface, but it's also programmable in the sense that if you have your pneumatics, you can inflate or deflate a diaphragm and change the lensing of those surfaces. And so you'd be able to actually change lensing without optics. If you have a parabolic or a concave mirror that you're able to change the internal pressure of, such that you'd be able to kind of direct those things relatively sort of cheaply. So that would be a lot of fun to be able to kind of then figure out how to have that intervene on an entire space. This is something of a far cry from future of text, but I think that it's relevant in terms of the ability to manipulate spaces and have them encode things.
Is that sort of that kind of display mechanism, that foveal focusing, whatever, is that being worked on anywhere else?
So in terms of having sort of a high fidelity central vision and a low fidelity thing, I'm not aware of any particular work. And Benko's work has gone somewhat dark as a consequence of moving inside a thing that is more tilted towards explicit sort of commercial stuff than Microsoft Research, which was part of a commercial organization, but nevertheless understood to be a research wing. So I'm not sure of what he's done. I don't know anything about anything that Apple does in that regard. But because, for the most part, it's been pretty, like, Apple's never even released a projector, let alone anything else like that. So, the displays are as large as the displays are. I guess, what was the largest cinema display? 27? No, there was a bigger one, wasn't there? Or
I think so.
Right. So yeah, I think and an iMac, I think the biggest ever. No, so the Apple Pro display XDR
Oh.
was 32. But anyway, so I think that's the largest display Apple's ever released.
Yeah.
'Cause I quite like abstracting the notion even back into a generated display space. So in other words, thinking less about it in terms of the screen, but even just if you say, here is some data, I'm going to make a view of it. It's bigger than I can look at in one piece. And going back to our very early sort of mention of, well, how you make things sort of fade into the background and something, maybe that's one approach, because in a sense that as you look at it, you see stuff, and part of that's deliberate, because you don't want to give undue presence to the things that are way outside your point of interest. Sometimes you might. I mean, there's no one size fits all, but I just, it came to my mind that strikes me as a really interesting notion in terms of the way you approach the display or the creation of information that may be put into a display, let alone how the display itself tries to display it, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. Well, the reality is that we see so little that that in terms of the fidelity of what that display actually has. If you know that your attention, if not your intent, like your intentional attention, so to speak, is sort of constrained and fixated on a specific sort of conceptual or spatial region, then yeah, you have the ability to do a lot more. You have the ability to do a lot less with the stuff around it.
I was going to say, which allows you to be really profligate in other areas. So that's right. There's a hidden upside in it.
Yeah, I was thinking architecturally, if you have a lot of really dumb terminals of display devices in a space, and they're connecting to a comparatively scarcer resource of kind of a rendering server, then if you know somebody's literally not looking behind them, then you just turn them off. You're not sending them any fidelity. And so if you have the ability to intermediate between the graphics processing and the display devices, such that the projectors back there are just projecting 4 pixels worth, in order to be able to get the sort of the ambient backcast of the red sheen of the thing, then yeah, that's interesting, because right now, yeah, the concept of foveation is still much more tightly constrained to the level of fidelity of the bottom left corner of your screen, versus the idea that it might be a pixel that is actually completely outside of anybody's direct capacity for sensation at this point. So that's really interesting. And sort of back to, as I was saying, that stepping way back from what CSS is right now to what CSS sort of technically and functionally is, was an interesting and fairly revelatory sort of moment for my friend, that foveation per se is a concept that one can also step back from and see much more of as a consequence. That's fun. That's really fun.
On a completely different tack, and something that I'm wondering, well, obviously it'll be great in VR, but it may be too much, is when you show that Chrome, I bought a 6 centimeter iron ball, because I saw a statistic that if you blow that up to be the size of the Earth, then each iron atom is that size. So it's something to try to teach Edgar. So I look forward to, many demo type rooms in VR where you go in to experience that and the solar system and all of that good stuff. So far, I haven't found any good solar system stuff for the Oculus. It's surprising, isn't it? Because it strikes one as being one of the most self-evident things to do with virtual reality, is to be able to manipulate scales like that. I know my daughter really loved a film called Cosmic Zoom, which is sort of very closely related to Powers of 10. And she used to watch it every time she had to go potty. But it's a phenomenal sort of exploration of what was then known to be the minimum and maximum scale. What's funny is that we can tack another order of magnitude or so on either end of it now. But yeah, like just really interesting as an exploration in 2 dimensions on a screen.
very apt to have the ability to take that into 3D and just put the rest of it on either side of it would be a really fun thing to do.
Yeah, at the beginning of my adventure at Southampton, I wanted to make a sculpture, 1 meter wide sculpture, 3D printed in clear resin, where every tiny air bubble is a known galaxy, where we are in the center. And you know, the data sets are available, but the ability to print it that big isn't. It would be too cloudy and all kinds of things. I just thought it'd be great to have a sculpture of what we knew of the universe now. Updated any, you know, if we know more next year, that's fine, but that's what we know now. But to do something like that in VR, you know, like zooming all the way out to Laniakea or something like that, but then always having the Earth in the center. Actually, I met Brian Cox once. He was doing a presentation, and he was talking about how, you know, humans are no longer at the center of the universe and all of that stuff. And then later on, someone talked about how there isn't a center of the universe because the Big Bang expanded everywhere at once. So I just asked him, well, doesn't that mean that we are actually at the center of the universe? So we kind of are, right? At least from our own perspective. Anyway, those things could be just amazing.
I'm just imagining though, in VR space, sort of having this, get out to model. It's a bit like the Oregon Trail, So you're now on Earth. I want you to now walk to Mercury.
A friend of mine in Norway, I think you've met him, Mark. Actually, you both have, Björn. You're very interested in space and all this stuff. He pointed out that at the speed of light, the time it takes for a photon of light to leave the sun to enter, I think it was Neptune, 40 minutes. Oh, by the way, Emily and I saw the movie Ad Astra the other day, the one with, what's his face? I can't remember. Anyway, it's a bit ludicrous. There's some physics stuff that just can't be done, but it's got like a 70s movie visual feel to it. It's a slow moving, nice story. So it's about traveling a bit around in the solar system. If you haven't seen it already, I highly recommend it for the atmosphere, not the logic.
I think it was on the plane on our way to New Zealand just before the pandemic. And it did look pretty. A lot of sort of languishing in great, glorious spatial environment.
Yeah, it's good for that. But right, so yeah, we're wrapping up. It's nice when the conversations go in all kinds of different tangents. I hope to send the first version of the intentions of the lab quite soon. To start getting some really good advisors on board. So if you guys have any feedback this week, that would be really, really good.
Sure. Yeah. No, I'll read the document, and I think that process of getting the multicast capability up and running for a Quest to be able to kind of consume a document that's being opened by another machine should be relatively straightforward. Should be pretty painless kind of augmentation of that current system, and then that will be neat because it will let other participants get into it. I mean, the write back of it is a little bit more complicated, not difficult, but just complicated in so far as it requires the ability to find the place to write to and things like that. But yeah. Should be neat.
I just emailed sorry, I was just going to say I emailed the two of you the .liquid version of the documents. So if you want to comment on it directly, you can do that. Yeah, it's thank you, Brandel, for thinking about this and doing it. It's quite amazing.
Yeah, no, it's fun. It's an interesting sort of application in the sense of being applied to something. Because as you say, Mark, there's a lot of people who sort of say, imagine just having a really big screen, and probably they don't even imagine just having a really big screen because then now what? having the benefit of not having the ability to imagine at all means that I have to build it instead.
I mean, I would use the big screen to watch videos that I film, especially of my son. Just, my closest friend who was a photographer who died a few years ago, him and I, we couldn't watch a movie without, oh my God, there's clipping in the sky. Who cares about this scene? Right? It's just, we all, like obsessing over typography, I guess, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I'm very excited. So one of the things that I've been trying to do is figure out things that I can get my daughter to do more constructively on a computer. She doesn't use it unconstructively. She doesn't use it at all for the most part. I got her to play with Blender and put a Santa hat on a monkey head because monkey heads are primitives there, and so you just stack a cone in a sphere. And got her to build a candy cane, but I don't know how much she remembers all of the steps for it. But getting into Photoshop and drawing is interesting. But I learned I learned to paint. We're using a paintbrush in Windows 3, and at that time we had a 320p monitor. It was a black and white monochrome CGA thing, and so it was by definition sort of low fidelity pixel art, and as such a lot easier to get something satisfying. When you have a 4K monitor and 32-bit color and a Wacom Intuos Pro tablet, then all of those possibilities are much less constrained, and as a consequence, at some level, it's actually a little bit harder to get started. And so I got her into. Go ahead.
No, sorry. Carry on. Yes,
and so I got into, and I decided, okay, so maybe we will do some pixel art. So I showed her some Susan Kare, the original icon designer for the Macintosh. And then we zoomed in all the way to what is Photoshop result sort of report the zoom level as? It's like 16,000%. No, 12,800% zoom is what they call the highest zoom level on this screen now. And it occurred to me that the way I think about, I love it. Do you know what that? Oh, that's awesome. Do you know what that symbol is?
Yes. Being Norwegian, I kind of have to. It means place of interest on a map.
Right, but do you know what it is?
Yeah, castle from above.
Yeah. You know that my office is that shape.
Really?
Yeah. So actually, no. My office is now officially an Apple Park, so it's a circle. But the building at Central and Wolf, which was designed by Foster and Partners, but then dropped because Steve Jobs didn't like it. But it was far enough along in the planning phase that Foster's sold it to somebody else, and so then they built it. It's a command symbol. They've lopped one of the corners off, so it's three-sided. So we call it the fidget spinner. But it's pretty funny, and the floor plan of it is actually the commands. Is three lobes of the command symbol, and then the fourth is the cafeteria.
That's interesting. And talking of buildings, some of this early stage stuff we're working on with VR and so on, to me, it feels a lot like we are the pirates of Bandly 5, and I remember Stephen Levy's book on the Mac started with basically, at first there was the lights. I could imagine, a while from now when obviously a lot of people are going to VR. We're by no means the first, but I could imagine putting the headset on Vint and other people like that, and they see a completely new light and the opportunities that can actually be in this thing. It's so exciting, so exciting.
That's the hope. But yeah, so with the zoom and the pixel art, one of the things that occurred to me is that I've always imagined myself just being slammed right up against an enormous pixel grid, just that it exists out to infinity in all directions effectively when you're at a thing. So when you said using a large display to watch movies, I was like, I don't think you'd watch a movie like that. But yeah, like just the sort of the sheer scale of those things, I think is pretty exciting. One of the first shaders I did was to try to explain Retina when we still thought that was a relevant concept, to show the actual pixel grid on a Retina phone versus other phones, having the ability to make that sort of dynamically responsive or have a sort of a non-uniform kind of magnifying loop to be able to kind of show it. But yeah,
I remember that on the website you're talking about.
yeah, then we never shipped my thing because it was people have had apprehensions about using the 3D graphics sort of requirements at that stage for doing it. But it's an interesting sort of representation to be able to kind of make people aware of and familiar with the sort of the different consequences of display. Yeah. I just love that sort of it's very interstellar, you know, just looking at your PSD as though it's sort of 200 meters wide.
Let's end on Interstellar, because that stuff sets off a lot of interesting thoughts, hopefully to inspire next time.
Yes.
I've got to go make pasta for the family. Very demanding cooking task.
Indeed.
See you all on Friday, and thank you for today, guys. Bye.
Yeah.